everyone. Thank you so much for again tuning in and joining me here for the second lesson in the series I Want More. And we're taking kind of just walking through Hebrews chapter 11 and looking about how we can combat sin, how we can fight against sin with our desires. And with that, how we can want something more than what sin offers, something more than what this world can give us. And faith is, we defined it last week as wanting more, wanting something that only God can give us, that this world cannot offer us. And so faith is wanting more of God. And so when we look about how to have faith and how to fight our temptations and sins, today I want to look at acceptance and how we all desire to be accepted. And so as we do that, please grab your Bibles and we're going to be going in Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews chapter 11. But acceptance is one of those things that we all want. We all desire to be accepted. We want to be accepted by our friends, and so this desire to want to be accepted by others, to want to please other people, causes us to act in certain ways that we might change who we are in order to get other people's approval or acceptance. So often, people, you'll end up liking the same things as your friends, not because you actually like those things, but because you want to be accepted by your friends. You want something common that they'll think that you're cool and that they'll accept you by. And so you try to earn their acceptance and try to gain their acceptance by changing who you are and by going and trying to just do everything you can to get them to approve of you. And so for me, this was huge in my life when I was in middle school and high school, and still to a point is today. It's not something that you ever kind of grow out of, but it is something that you can fight. And so this desire, though, to want to be accepted, for me, it caused me to buy certain clothes. I wanted a brand name on there so that kids would think that I was cool. I wanted and how I talked, I wanted to people to think that I was cool and accept me because of what I said, what I looked like, and how I acted. And so it affected a lot of what I was doing and who I was. But I was searching for acceptance. And, as I had some friends that seemed to accept me at times, and at other times I was dreadfully afraid that they were rejecting me and that I had no friends and I was all alone and I didn't know what to do. My life was crashing down. And so, it was kind of flip-flop constantly of, are these people do they like me really or not? Or I invited this person to spend time with me, be over at my house, but he didn't invite me back. Why? Well, what's going on here? And then as I grew older, we all desire acceptance, and sometimes that fleshes out in not only with friends, but with a girl or a guy wanting them to be your girlfriend or boyfriend. And you might end up stop hanging out with your friends or stop doing something so you can earn their acceptance and change how you look in order to get them to notice you and different things. And so you're constantly trying to earn their acceptance. It might even impact your relationship with your parents. And I know parents are watching this, but so often, like the kids who are especially who are really good, who try to act good and try to please their parents, it's because they want their parents' approval. They're trying to earn their acceptance, and so they're getting the right grades, or they're trying to do the right things, or act the right way, or dress the right way, and so that their parents would look at them and say, "Man," and accept them. But that is also a fearful way of living. It's stressful and it causes a lot of anxiety, and it's constantly this worry of, will they accept me tomorrow? What if I mess up? What if I do this? See, our longing for other people's acceptance is actually something that God gave us. And we long for acceptance, but acceptance that is greater than any of these people can give us. We want to be accepted, but we want to be accepted in a way greater than what our friends can give us, greater than what a boyfriend or girlfriend could give us, greater than even what our parents could give us. And so we want an acceptance that we cannot earn, but an acceptance that we can only receive. And we find that in Hebrews chapter 11, this acceptance that God is offering to us. And again, it's an acceptance that we can't earn. We can't get it. We can't earn it simply by trying harder. But it's an acceptance that we can receive from him. And so I want to look at Hebrews chapter 11. And we're just going to look at one verse, but there's a lot in this one verse, okay? And so Hebrews chapter 11, verse 4. And this is what it says. By faith, Abel offered to God a more acceptable sacrifice than Cain, through which he was commended as righteous, God commending him by accepting his gifts. And through his faith, though he died, he still speaks. And so it starts off and says that Abel, he was by faith made a more, offered to God a more acceptable sacrifice than Cain, through which he was commended as righteous. And so God accepted Abel's sacrifice. And so Abel's a man who he wanted to be accepted, and he found that acceptance in God. And so as we look at this, I want you to see that Abel's sacrifice was more acceptable to God. Why? Because it was by faith. It says that he did this by faith. So he was making this sacrifice not for himself, not to please somebody else, but for God. He was making this sacrifice to please God. And so we see here that the sacrifice was for God instead of others. And this might seem like a no-brainer point. Like, of course, like, why would you make a sacrifice of somebody else? But if we look at the story of, in Genesis chapter 4, of Cain and Abel making the sacrifice, it's pretty interesting, the contrast between Cain's sacrifice and Abel's sacrifice, and why Abel's sacrifice was so much better. And so I just want to read Genesis chapter 4. I'll read the first 7 verses. We'll kind of work through this story. But notice what it says. Adam made love to his wife Eve. Whoa. And she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. And she said, with the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man. Later, she gave birth to his brother, Abel. Now, Abel kept flocks, and Cain worked the soil. And so she has these 2 sons. And notice how she names Cain, and she says, with the Lord's help, I have brought forth a man. And she's real excited that she has a firstborn son. Why is she so excited about this son? If we look back in chapter 3 of Genesis, God gives Adam and Eve a promise as he's dealing with Adam and Eve's sin. They have just disobeyed him, eaten the tree of the garden of knowledge of good and evil, and God has found them out, and he's confronting them, and he's dealing with their sin. But as he does this, he says this. He says, a seed of the woman, a child, an offspring of the woman is going to come, and he, so they know it's a man, is going to crush the serpent's head. And so Cain is born, and Eve says, we have a man. And I think she's saying this. I'm kind of reading into this, but I think it's there. That what she's hoping for is that her firstborn son, Cain, is the one who's going to crush the serpent's head. He's going to be the one that's going to correct their wrongs. He's going to fix their mistakes. And so her hope is in her son, maybe. And so that's one way to look at it. And as we see this is that Cain then goes ahead and they grow up, and he becomes a farmer. And Abel, she has Abel, and he becomes a shepherd. And notice what they do. It says, in the course of time, in verse 3, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. And so this is Cain's idea. Cain's the one who it seems to be, the one who came up with this idea. Hey, I'm going to make a sacrifice. And then he says, and Abel also brought an offering. And Abel's like, that's a good idea. I should do that too. So he brought an offering. But notice the difference of their offering. Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil for an offering. And so this wasn't the best fruit. This wasn't the first fruit of the harvest. This may have been the leftovers. This may have been just something that he had at that time around. And I'm sure it wasn't the worst, but there's a quality difference between his sacrifice and Abel's sacrifice. And notice how it describes Abel's offering. And it says, Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. And so the fat portions are the best part. And of the firstborn of the flock is the supreme, the best of the flock. And so Abel brought the best of the best that he had to offer to God. And Cain made a sacrifice that seemed like he was doing it for the right reasons. And it seemed to be coming just from him. But I wonder this. Is he doing this just to get approval from his parents? Is Cain making this sacrifice more for his parents than he is for God? And whatever it is, we know this, that Cain isn't making a sacrifice to God. He's making a sacrifice, but it's not for God. But yet Abel's sacrifice is for God. Why? Because it's by faith. He has faith in God for this sacrifice, and he's doing it for him. So even though I'm not sure if Abel was, if this came from his heart, or if he saw Cain, he was like, that's a good idea, I'll join in. But whatever it is, when Abel made that sacrifice, he made it for God. Not to impress somebody else, but he made it because he wanted to be close to God. And so what happens is in verse 5 of Genesis chapter 4, it says this, but on Cain and his offering, he did not look with favor. It says at the end, the Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering, he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. Then the Lord said to Cain, so Cain gets angry and upset because whatever God somehow showed them that he accepted Abel's offering, but did not accept Cain's offering. And so I don't know how he demonstrated that, but God somehow demonstrated that. It was very clear. Cain, you're not accepted. Abel, you are accepted. And so, but notice what God says to Cain. Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not what is right, sin is crouching at the door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. And so God's promising Cain this, saying, I will accept you, Cain. Cain, just make the right sacrifice. Do it for the right reasons. Make a sacrifice for me, not for anyone else, and I will accept you. He's giving him a guaranteed promise of open, wide arms acceptance for Cain, and Cain holds on to his anger. He does not desire to be accepted by God. If he did, he would have done what is right. But instead, as we know the story, he goes out with his brother in a field and he murders his own brother Abel because Abel was accepted and he was not. And he didn't really want God's acceptance, but Abel did. Abel desired to be accepted by God more than he desired to be accepted by anyone else. He was searching for an acceptance out of this world, and he found it with God. And that's why he made this sacrifice by faith to God. And so this sacrifice that he made was better because it was a better sacrifice because it was made for God and not for someone else. This idea of appearing better than what we are to gain people's approval is very common in our own hearts and life and in other people's. Jesus dealt with this with the Pharisees, and he says in Matthew chapter 6, verse 1, he says, be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. And so it was so common for people to give in a way where everyone saw how much they gave, and they gave to these people, but they did so not for God, but to be watched and seen by others. They would pray supposedly to God, but really they want to be heard by other people about how holy and good they looked and sounded. And they would fast, and they would wear these clothes and wear dirty clothes and just have a sad look on their face, so everyone would know that they were fasting for God. when it really wasn't for God. It was so that everybody would approve of them and look at them. See, we are all approval junkies. We want to be accepted by other people. And whether that means that we try to become better than what we are, or we try to be accepted by doing worse things than we should, it's both the same result. That we're doing this for other people, and God says, if you want their acceptance, you have it, but you don't have mine. But if you want my acceptance, I will give it to you, but you have to do it for me. When you do these things, you have to do them for me. Are you living for God? Are you praying to God? Do you do these things for Him? Or are you doing this just to appear good? Do you read your Bible to get close with God, or do you read your Bible to appear like you're a good kid to your parents? Why do you do what you do? And so do these things for God by faith. And because of that, Abel had a better sacrifice. Continuing on, it says that the sacrifice was good for him. Notice back in Hebrews chapter 11, it talks about more. That through which he was commended as righteous. That God looked at Abel and said, "You're righteous." See, this sacrifice was better because it was for God, but it was also better because it was good for Abel. That Abel received something for it. He was declared righteous. And he was declared righteous before God, right before God. All of his sins, all of his guilt, all of his shame, and all of his hiding was taken away because it had been dealt with. He had made a sacrifice to God, and God said, "I accept you." And that's as much as he needed. But God didn't just accept him. He made him what he was created to be. Holy, righteous, pure, clean. And so Abel is declared righteous, not by something he did. He didn't earn this. This is something that it was because of his faith in God. Because he believed in God, God said, "I'm going to make you right with me so you can be with me forever, so that we can have a relationship and be open with each other." And so you have that he was made right, not because what he did, but who he did it for. He made this sacrifice for God. That is what made him righteous. And that's why God declared him righteous. See, when you believe in God and when you live for him and for his approval, he says, "I accept you for who you are. But I'm not going to leave you the way you are. I'm going to make you righteous. I'm going to make you holy. I'm going to make you as I created you to be." And so that is something that is so good, is that we desire to be better than what we are. We want to grow, but we don't have to earn his acceptance. He gives it freely to us for who we are, right where we're at, right with all of our sins and mess ups. But he doesn't let us remain there. He says, "No, I'm going to declare you righteous before me. I'm going to bring you into my family, and I'm going to make you who I created you to be." And so we see that the sacrifice was good for him. We also see that the sacrifice was beyond his life. It says at the very end of verse 4 in Hebrews 11 that through his faith, though he died, he still speaks. After Cain killed Abel, God confronted Cain and said, "What have you done? Where's your brother?" And he says, "Am I my brother's keeper?" Acting like he doesn't know anything about it, and he didn't know where his brother was when he knew he had buried him in the ground. But God says a very interesting thing. He says, "The blood of Abel is crying out to me." And how could Abel cry out to God if he was dead? See, the thing is this is a hint that Abel's not dead. Abel is physically dead. His body is in the ground. But he's crying out to God, and God's listening to him and able to hear him because he's with God. Abel is with God at this point. And when you're accepted by God, it goes beyond this life. that no matter what happens in this life, that your eternity is secure. That what you see is you see Abel with God for all of eternity, and God has accepted him into his home to be with him forever, not to cast him out or reject him at any point. And so we have this security that we have that goes beyond the grave, that goes beyond this life, and acceptance that is beyond this world, that is beyond this life. And so when God accepts us, he accepts us for eternity, into his family forever. And Abel, because he lived by faith in God and made the sacrifice for God by faith, it says that God not only made him righteous, God not only accepted him, but God also brought him to himself forever, so that he heard Abel and that he listened to Abel and he dealt with his brother Cain's sin. This is a better acceptance than we could ever hope for, than we could ever long for, ever get from our parents, ever get from our friends, ever get from a boyfriend or a girlfriend. This kind of acceptance is something that all of us crave and desire. And it says in the beginning of this verse that in chapter 11, verse 4, it says, by faith Abel offered to God a more acceptable sacrifice. The author of Hebrews here is pointing us back to something he just said in chapter 10 about Jesus Christ and the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. See, he compared the sacrifice of the Old Testament Levites and sacrificing the animals, and he said that was good, but what Jesus did on the cross, on dying on the cross, was far better. He is the better sacrifice. And Cain and Abel offered a better sacrifice than Cain, but that was pointing to an even better sacrifice that Jesus Christ would make. And when he died on the cross, that Jesus' sacrifice was once for all. In chapter 10, verses 12 through 14, it says, But when this priest had offered for all time one sacrifice for sins, he sat down at the right hand of God. Jesus Christ, being the priest that's talked about, he offered himself for all time, one sacrifice for all sins. And then he sat down at the right hand of God, having finished that work. In verse 13, and since that time he has waited for his enemies to be made his footstool. In verse 14, for by one sacrifice he has made perfect forever those who are being made holy. And so it's like, wait, one sacrifice accomplished far more than all the sacrifices of the Old Testament. What's going on here? Well, Jesus' sacrifice is far better than any other sacrifice, and it is his sacrifice that we are accepted by God from. Is that I'm accepted by God, not because of what I done, how I lived, or even how good I am or how bad I am. It's not anything to do with me. It has everything to do with Jesus Christ. That God accepted the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. And when I place my faith in that better sacrifice, that God accepts me, not because of me, but because of Jesus Christ's sacrifice. That he has paid for all my sins, all my mess ups, and all my inadequacies. I don't have to earn his acceptance. I can just receive it by faith in Jesus Christ. That he is the better sacrifice for me. And that's what Abel points us to. Because just like Abel, I have greater acceptance from God because by trusting in the better sacrifice of Jesus. I have a greater acceptance by God by trusting in the greater sacrifice of Jesus. And so what are you trusting in? Where are you finding your acceptance? Is it from your friends? Are you trying to earn it? Or are you enjoying the acceptance that God gives you that says, I'm going to accept you just the way you are. And then I am going to make you all that I created you to be. And I'm not ever going to cast you out. But if the worst of worst happens and you die, I'm going to bring you to myself because I've accepted you for eternity. And I'm never going to leave you. I'm never going to cast you out. I'm never going to reject you. I'm never going to send you away. This is great acceptance. parents and students, as we kind of come to the close of this, I want you to really think about, where are you trying to find acceptance from?